Berlin, 1852, a schoolteacher who spends his days explaining mathematics to boys sits down in his free hours to do the thing he loves most, give pieces away to chase a king. His name is Adolf Anderssen, and the game he is about to play will be remembered, more than a century on, as the Evergreen. If a quiet game like this is how you'd like to fall asleep, take a moment to subscribe. There's a new one each week. Across the board sits Jean Dufresne, a writer, a Berliner, a devoted player who has come to test himself against one of the great attackers of the age. This is the romantic era of chess, when a beautiful attack was prized far above a safe little point. And Anderssen plays in exactly that spirit, bold, generous, willing to part with material if it opens a path to the enemy king. Piece after piece will be offered up, until the finish arrives in a single sweeping flourish. Years later, the champion Wilhelm Steinitz paid it a tribute that gave the game its name. He called it an evergreen in the crown of the departed chess hero, and the name has stayed with it ever since. Close your eyes now and let the board take shape in the dark. White at the near edge, black at the far, every piece still home, waiting. White begins the way so many great games begin. The king's pawn, forward 2 squares to e4. A single step into the center, claiming space, opening lines for the bishop and the queen. Black answers in the mirror. The e-pawn comes to e5, planting its own flag in the middle of the board. 2 pawns, face to face, each holding the other still. White brings out the king's knight from g1 to f3. It leans in toward the center and eyes the pawn on e5. A quiet threat, the most natural move on the board. Black defends, calm and sure. The queen's knight steps to c6 guarding e5, doing 2 jobs at once. Now White's light bishop slides out to c4. Picture its diagonal, a long, clear road reaching all the way to f7. That square f7 sits just in front of the black king, guarded only by the king himself. It is the soft spot in black's camp, and the bishop has already found it. Black mirrors once more. The dark bishop comes to c5, aiming back down the board at White's own tender square, f2. This is the old Italian opening, 2 bishops drawn, 2 diagonals crossing, the position poised and even. And here White does something bold. The b-pawn leaps forward 2 squares to b4. It stands right in the path of black's bishop, offered up for free. This is the Evans Gambit, a pawn given away on purpose to buy time and fire. White is saying, take my pawn, and while you spend a move grabbing it, I will build. Black accepts the gift. The bishop captures on b4, lifting the pawn from the board. Now White has the lead in the race, and a plan to seize the center. The c-pawn steps up to c3. It nudges the black bishop and quietly prepares the big push in the middle. Black's bishop slides back along the diagonal to i5, staying active, still pinning nothing but watching. And now the center bursts open. White's pawn drives forward to d4. 2 white pawns on c3 and d4 stand shoulder to shoulder in the heart of the board. They strike at e5 and demand answers. Black takes, the e-pawn captures on d4. Now picture the whole board for a moment. White's king and queen still stand at home, but the pieces are uncoiling. That bishop on c4 still stares down at f7. The knight on f3 is poised. A lone black pawn sits deep on d4, won but undefended, a small trophy in dangerous country. White does not rush to win it back. Instead, the king tucks itself away, white castles kingside. The king slides to g1, the rook swings to f1, and the corner closes like a door. White is ready now, fully housed, while black's king still lingers in the center. And black, instead of catching up, pushes that little pawn onward, to d3. Onward, into white's half of the board, slipping past the squares, where it might have been recaptured. It is a clever, stubborn idea. The pawn refuses to be eaten, and it clogs white's lines for a while. But it costs black time, and time is the very thing this gambit feeds on. Now white's queen wakes up. She swings out to b3. Feel what just happened on that long diagonal. The queen on b3 and the bishop on c4 now both aim at f7. Two attackers, trained on the one square in front of the black king, and only the king to guard it. The threat is real. Take on f7, and black's position would crack open. Black must meet it, and the answer is a graceful one. The black queen steps out to f6. From f6 she guards f7 a second time, and she glares back down at f2, white's own sore square. One move, defending and threatening at once, the balance held by a thread. White pushes again, calm and relentless. The e-pawn advances to e5. It strikes at the black queen on f6 and shoulders her away from her post. She cannot stay, she must move, and the defense of f7 loosens. The queen retreats sideways to g6. Still watching, still poised, but a step further from her king. Let the board settle in your mind again. White's pawn now stands proud on e5, a wedge driven deep. The bishop on c4 still burns along its diagonal. The queen sits on b3. White is castled, safe, every piece leaning toward the black king. Black has two bishops and an extra pawn far advanced on d3, but the king still has no home. It is the gambit's bargain laid bare. Black holds the material, white holds the fire. White brings the rook into the game. From f1 it shifts to e1, taking the open file behind the e-pawn. The rook stares straight up the board toward the black king's quarter. Every white piece is now pointed the same way, like iron filings turned toward a magnet. Black hurries to develop and shield the king. The knight from g8 comes to e7. It blocks lines, supports g6, and reaches toward the safer squares. Black is trying to knit a shelter together. White finds another quiet, deadly idea. The dark bishop swings out to i3. See its new diagonal, i3, b4, c5, all the way to f8. It rakes across the board and pins down the squares where black's king would love to castle. That bishop quietly says, "You will not find safety on the king side." The black king is trapped in the middle, hemmed in by white's gaze. And now black makes a move that modern analysis shows to be a slight inaccuracy. The b-pawn advances to b5. It reaches out to slap the bishop on c4, hoping to win a moment, to chase the attacker off its diagonal. It is tempting, gain a tempo, push white back, but it lets the storm closer in. The quieter, stronger path was d5. Picture it? The d-pawn stepping up to d5, slamming the door on that bishop's diagonal, blunting the aim at f7. That move would have steadied black, closed the dangerous road, and held the extra pawn with far less peril. Instead, b5 opens a new line and offers white's queen a fresh target. And white does not hesitate. The queen sweeps from b3 and captures the pawn on b5. She lands deep in black's position, and look at what she touches now. From b5, she eyes the knight on c6, and she renews the old pressure toward f7 along the diagonal beside the bishop. The black king sits in the center, pieces scattered around it, white's queen and bishop circling closer. Every white piece is awake now, and black must answer with care. Black moves, and the rook on i8 slides quietly across to b8. It comes to rest on the open file, looking straight up at the white queen. She has wandered deep into enemy ground to snatch a pawn, and now she must answer for it. White draws her back. The queen retreats to i4. Out of danger, yet still watching the pale diagonal that runs toward the black king. Black's dark bishop steps from i5 to b6. It turns its gaze across the board, down onto f2, the soft square beside white's castle. Now white's last sleeping piece stirs. The knight on b1 comes to d2, and at last every white man has a part to play. Black answers in kind. The light bishop on c8 slips out to b7. It lies along the great diagonal now, peering past the center toward white's king in the corner. Only the black knight on c6 stands in its way. White's knight springs from d2 to e4 into the very heart of the board. From there it touches f6 and d6 and g5, and it dreams of leaping in among the black pieces. Black brings the queen to f5, beside the knight, both of them staring at white's home. Yet modern analysis points to a finer path, not taken. That small black pawn on d3, the splinter buried deep in white's camp, could have crept on to d2. One step from becoming a new queen, tearing at white's rooks, buying black precious time. Instead, the queen swings to f5, and the splinter waits. White does not wait. The bishop on c4 swoops down and plucks the pawn from d3. The splinter is gone, and the bishop stands now on d3, awake on a new diagonal. From d3 it stares straight at the black queen on f5. She cannot stay, so she glides onto h5, edging toward the white king. Behind her, the bishop on b7 leans down the long diagonal, and the threat begins to gather. Now comes the move the world remembers, bold and not quite sound. The knight leaps to f6, right in front of the black king, and gives check. It offers itself on the very doorstep of the enemy. A colder, modern eye reveals a calmer way. The knight to g3, instead, striking the queen on h5, winning time without spending the horse. But Anderssen wants fire, not arithmetic. Black takes. The g7 pawn captures the knight on f6. And in taking, the shield before the black king is torn wide open. White's e5 pawn recaptures, stepping onto f6. A white pawn sits there now, a thorn beside the black king, smothering the dark squares around him. Black swings the rook from h8 to g8 onto the open file and aims it at the white king. Both kings feel the wind rising now. And here white plays the quietest move in all this storm. The rook on i1 steps softly across to d1. No check, no capture. It simply comes to the d file and looks down it toward d7, toward the black king. This is the move they remember. A silent rook laying the last stone of a trap that no one can yet see. Hold it in your mind, the rook on d1, watching d7. Black, sure of his own attack, reaches for the kill. The queen sweeps to f3 and takes the white knight. She threatens mate of her own now, Down on g2, right beside white's king. For a heartbeat, both sides stand a single move from victory. But it is now seen that black missed a crucial move. The dark bishop swung to d4 would have guarded the heart of his position and held the storm at bay. Instead, he grabs the knight and steps into eternity. Let the whole board take shape once more before the blow falls. White's king rests on g1 behind its pawns, quiet for the moment. The black king still stands in the center on e8, never having found safety. His rook sits beside him on g8. His queen has flown off to f3. A white pawn smothers f6, choking the dark squares by the black king. One white bishop fans out on d3, aimed across the board. The other stands far back on i3, seemingly asleep. Mark that sleeping bishop well. Its dark diagonal points toward e7 and f8, toward the very squares the black king must go. White's rooks hold the center on d1 and e1. The queen waits on i4. Behind the black queen, the bishop on b7 still gleams down the long diagonal. Two kings, two storms, and white to move. White strikes first. The rook on e1 crashes into e7 and takes the knight with check. A whole rook flung at the black king. Black takes it back. The knight from c6 recaptures on e7. Analysis shows the king should have fled to d8 instead. But by capturing, he leaves himself bare in the center, and now the storm breaks in full. Here is the immortal stroke. White gives up the queen. She flies from i4 all the way across to d7, takes the pawn, and gives check. She lands there guarded by the very rook that crept to d1. The black king cannot refuse her. She sits in check, right at his side. He takes the queen. The king steps onto d7. And now he stands utterly alone out in the open, far from any friend. The bishop on d3 slides to f5 and checks him along the diagonal. It drives the lonely king backward. He retreats to e8, the very square he came from. The bishop steps into d7 and checks once more. And here, at last, is the secret of that silent rook. The king would dearly love to simply take this bishop. But the rook on d1 guards d7. To capture would be to walk straight into its line. He cannot. So the king shuffles aside, into the corner to f8. And now the sleeper wakes. The bishop that has stood on i3 since the opening, patient, forgotten, sweeps the whole length of the dark diagonal and takes the knight on e7. Check. And mate. See how the black king is caught, there on f8. He cannot take the bishop beside him. The little white pawn on f6 guards e7 and would answer any king that dared. He cannot slip back to e8, the bishop on d7 covers it. He cannot flee to g7, that pawn on f6 covers it too. And his own rook fills g8. There is nowhere left to go. The board has closed around him like a slow hand. Checkmate. It is finished. Two bishops, a single pawn, and the whisper of a rook brought the king down, while the white queen lay given up on d7, never to be recovered. They have called this game the Evergreen ever since. A green leaf that never fades. Adolf Anderssen, in Berlin, more than a century and a half ago, left this little fire burning. for anyone who cares to close their eyes and warm their hands by it. The pieces are still now. Let them rest where they fell. And let the board fade softly into the dark. Sleep well. The board will keep until morning. Good night.